can just see it from the back. Jazakumullah khair. One, two, and this was my inspiration to write this. Absolutely. Inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Yes.
The sisters pray back there, and the brothers are going to. Why do those brothers always pray? It's very unnecessary.
Where do they pray?
They pray, in the front.
You mean the sunnah prayers afterwards?
Well, in before and after. So when you kind of leave, you feel, I feel uncomfortable.
In front of the door, right next to the door.
Right next to the door.
Yeah, I guess it's just the darkness thing or something. We should put a sign there though.
It just has been going on and on and on, and it's usually just a few of them, but
I tell you what, do me a favor. If just imagine a map out of the masjid. What portion of space do you think we should? Just no one in front of the. Okay. Can you send me an email reminder? I'm gonna forward it with Samar and Sheikh Faqih. We'll put some signs or something. This is sisters, Please respect sisters, Absolutely, absolutely. Inshallah, we'll take it out. Inshallah. Yusuf, borrow you for a second. You do me a favor. Can you take this number down? Help this dude get on live stream with Canvas. Somehow you register for the class, he doesn't know how to get on Canvas.
Call him?
Or just text him while you're in the class. Here and there, if you can.
Said?
You got it?
Yeah. Does he know I'm going to contact him?
No.
Okay, I'll
Just introduce yourself.
What sharh is that?
Sharh of what? It's not a sharh.
Because it says sharh.
Where?
PDF?
Oh, this?
Yeah.
We're not using this.
Can you get it though?
Huh?
Whose sharh is it?
This one, I don't even know. I'm gonna open it and answer it for you. This is the sharh of Abdullah al-Ibadi.
This is Ali Baluch.
Alaikum salam. How you doing? Alhamdulillah. This is the sharh of Abdullah al-Ibadi. Or Abbadi, maybe. Okay. I doubt it. That's with the dad. So take Tajweed class, inshallah. Alright. Class notes. Yes, let's see. Okay, we got our syllabus here. And we got our reader here. Alright. Good. So before we begin, how many of you actually did your homework and turned it in? Alhamdulillah. Sisters and no brother, or one brother. Good. Alhamdulillah. The homework? The homework that's on Canvas that we talked about last week. You did it? Oh, nice. MashaAllah. You did it? The outline, right? Okay, good. You raise your hand. The brothers. Okay. Alhamdulillah. That's all right. We'll check it for you, inshallah ta'ala. All right. So we covered the niyyah, the intention already. So let's move on to the next topic. So intention we covered. So we're going to talk about wiping the head. So we got a lot of topics to cover actually today. So we're going to be moving pretty fast. So let's begin. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Just to remind you once again, some of the goals for this class are to understand the issue, to understand the reason and the causes of the differences of opinion, to appreciate them, appreciate why they differed, and to learn how to read a classical text that's condensed and difficult to read, like this book by Ibn Rushd. So you keep those objectives in mind while you're following along, and you're more likely to not become depressed or stressed out when you're going through this, okay? Yes. Right, so I had mentioned that as well, meaning my opinion. Yeah, so I had mentioned that as well. So let me mention it again. So even students in my, even me as a student, I used to complain to my teacher that he would not give us his personal opinion on the issue. And I said that criticism was more valid for my class because we had never actually studied with that same teacher fiqh before. But in CIS, we've actually covered, so all my opinions have already been expressed in Islamic Law 101 and 102. So you know most of my opinions. Yeah. May Allah help them, inshallah. Yeah. Okay, so here's the standard position. Okay, the standard position, my methodology is I default to the Hanafi school unless I feel that there's a real reason why I should take a different opinion on a specific issue. And usually I only do that not so much because of the evidence, but more because of the ramifications of the issue. Okay, so I guess I will mention, so anytime you feel like, look, I already know what you taught before, or this is the Hanafi stance, or whatever it is, do you think that this opinion should be utilized in another way or fashion or something? And if you ask me, I'll answer it, inshallah. So I won't not answer it. Okay, is that fair? Yeah, for the online, so ask for them. They should be listening. So the online students, you have to ask a question. So if you want to know specifically, like, what is my opinion, or should we even use this opinion in our society, in our community, and you feel that maybe this opinion shouldn't be implemented or applied or whatever, just ask me and I'll answer it at that time, right? So, okay, so like for example, wiping over the turban. If you wonder and say, well, should we actually apply that? Should we do something like that? What are the ramifications of that? Just go ahead and ask me and I will answer that. Okay? Turban is not the same as hijab. Yeah, it's different. So, yeah, no, you're right. So we're about to get into hijab right now. 1.1.2.6. All right, so let's get there. 1.1.2.6. Okay, we need to zoom this in a little bit. 150%. Is that good? Can you follow? Can you see that? Yeah. Should we do, mashallah? Should we do 170? Let's do 170. Much better. Alhamdulillah. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So wiping over the head, what's called masah of the head. Wiping over the head, we're still talking about wudu. So the jurists agreed that wiping or masah of the head is one of the obligations of wudu. But they differed about the extent of wiping that's required for your wudu to be valid. Imam Malik said that it's obligatory to wipe the whole of it, meaning the whole of the head. So when you're wiping, you have to wipe the entire head. You have to wet your hand, obviously. You have to wipe your entire head. So your head is all the hair that's coming out from here to the sides. Everything needs to be wiped, according to Imam Malik. Ash-Shafi'i, some followers of Imam Malik, so notice that some followers of Imam Malik are differing with Imam Malik himself. So Ash-Shafi'i, some followers of Malik, and Imam Abu Hanifa, they all said that it's obligatory to wipe only a part of it. Not the entire thing, but there's a part of the head you have to wipe. You don't have to wipe the entire thing. Although it's still recommended. Right? You should always, whenever you're making wudu, you should always try to wipe the entire head. But we're right now zooming in on not what you should do, but what you have to do. So there's a difference. So we have to keep that in mind. Don't start going and saying, well, you know what, if I'm going to take the Shafi'i opinion, I'm going to stop wiping my whole head. Why have I been doing this the whole time? I can just make it faster. I can save water. I can do all these other things. This is not the approach. We're focusing only on what needs to be done for reasons of understanding Islamic law and approach and all of that. So, Ash-Shafi'i, some followers of Malik and Abu Hanifa said that it's obligatory to wipe part of the head. Some followers of Malik define the minimum part to be a third of the head. So what is 1/3 of the head? Imagine all the parts of your head from the back. Right? This is part of the head, this is part of the head, this is part of the head, all of this is part of the head. Imagine 1/3 of that. So whatever the region of 1/3 is, probably like maybe from like this region, is about maybe a little bit more than that, is about 1/3. If you count this, all of that. So imagine the surface of your head. They said you have to wipe 1/3 of your head. Other scholars from the followers of Imam Malik defined it as 2/3. So think about what's going on here. Imam Malik saying you have to wipe your entire head. Some of his students said, no, Imam, I disagree with you. You only have to wipe 1/3. Other students from the same teacher, they said, no, Imam, we disagree with you and your other students. You have to wipe 2/3. Now, where does 1/3 and 2/3 and all of that come from? That's something we're not going to get into in this class. But understand that there's so much more detail you can go into. And they all have their idea. So for example, the Maliki school, what they're going to say is that there's a statement of the Prophet, peace be upon him, where he was asked about inheritance. And he said, can I donate this much money? And he said no. So, can I donate this much money? He said no, for wasiyah, bequest. Those of you who took Islamic Law 102, what is the maximum amount of money you're allowed to leave as a bequest? Yusuf? 1/3. And the Prophet said, and he said, a-thuluth? He said 1/3. He says, yes, a-thuluth wa thuluthu kathir. And he says, 1/3 is a lot. Meaning 1/3 is sufficient, and it's also the limit on how much you're allowed to bequest to your non-heirs when you're about to die. So the Malikis took this and saying, this is the general principle. If the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that 1/3 is a lot, then you have to wipe most or a lot of your head. The definition of a lot is 1/3, because it's coming from the hadith on inheritance. So they looked at the entire thing and they said, where do we get 1/3 from? We have to find it somewhere in the words of the Prophet. He decides what 1/3 is, not our language of what a lot is, right? So he defined a lot as being 1/3 in this hadith about inheritance. We're going to apply it to other principles as well when it comes to a lot. So that's what they did. All right, so this is an example. So, and then other people got the idea of 2/3 from somewhere else. Imam Abu Hanifa, on the other hand, he limited it to 1/4. So he came up with the idea of 1/4. Now he says we don't need to base it on the hadith. He figured out another way. So he limited it and he says it has to be 1/4 of your head. And he also defined the part of the hand with which it's to be wiped as a fourth. So Imam Abu Hanifa said it's wiping with less than 3 fingers of your hand is insufficient. So you have to wipe with at least 3 fingers of your hand. Now where did Imam Abu Hanifa come up with this? So the Maliki said we need something that the Prophet said in order to define what is there. Imam Abu Hanifa said, no, look at it rationally. You're supposed to wipe your head. What do you normally use to wipe your head? The Quran, when it says wipe your head, you use your hand. You don't have to use both hands because it said wipe, so it didn't say both. So he says, technically you have to use one hand, and that's what you're supposed to be using. So what he's saying is that if you take your hand and you put it on your head, how many times can you put it on your head? You have 1, you have like 2, right? You could have like, these are like halves, and then you have another half here. So technically your entire hand is going to be 4 times over your head. That's why your hand is equal to about 1/4 of your head. So he came up with 1/4, because we have to utilize the instrument that you're going to be wiping with. And then he said, where did he come up with 3 fingers? So he said, well, technically, Islam doesn't force us to use everything, right? It doesn't say you have to wipe with every single part of your hand. Islam wants us to just do the vast majority of something, right? To the best of our ability. So he says that you have to use the majority of your hand. So what's the part that you're actually going to be wiping from your hand? Usually you're going to be using the finger part of the hand more to do the wiping, because that's what your fingers are going to be there for. And he says the vast majority, what is the majority of your fingers? If you have 5 fingers, what's the majority? 3. You can't say 2.5, right? 2 and 60%. So he says three fingers is the majority of 5. That's where he gets 3 fingers from. So they're using rational principles. They're using principles based on the hadith. They're using principles based on the Quran to get different amounts of the head that you need to wipe. And they all have different detailed arguments. But we're not going to get into all of these things. Right? And Ash-Shafi'i, he did not fix a limit for either one of them. So he says there's no limit. There's no 1/3. There's no 1/4. There's no 2/3. Anything you wipe of your head, it's sufficient. So he says, you could actually just take a little tiny drop of water. You just go like this, and you actually technically wipe your head, because the Quran says you need to wipe your head. So Imam Shafi'i said you can just go like this, just go out to the rain, and just go from the back. You can go like this, you just style a little bit like that one, and you're like, yeah, I'm good to go. So Imam Shafi'i took it very, more literally, and he said wiping means wiping. It doesn't matter how much you wipe with, what you wipe with, even if it's the smallest amount, that's more than sufficient. So for sisters, Imam Shafi would be like, wiping the hijab is a piece of cake. You just go like this, you're going to reach into the side. There you go. We're good to go. So this is Imam Shafi's opinion, and that's it. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff, right? So this is what Imam Shafi is saying. So you got two main opinions. One is you have to wipe the whole head. One is you have to wipe part of the head. And within the part of the head, you got a 1/3, you got a 2/3, you got a 1/4, and you got a no limit, which means any part of the head. Actually, Imam Shafi was a little bit more specific. He said you have to wipe 3 hairs. So he's not as hardcore as you would think. Actually, 3 hairs actually have to be, there touched. So that solves that problem. All right, the basis of this disagreement is due to the equivocality or the ishtirak, meaning equivocality that is in the particle ba in the usage of the Arabs. So those of you who took the Islamic Law 101, we've already talked about this a little bit before. So the letter ba in the verse of the Quran is a mushtarak word, which means it could have 2 potential meanings, and that's one of the causes of disagreement here. So what is the verse of the Quran? The verse of the Quran says, "Wamsahu bi ru'usikum." So if you can follow the Arabic, "Wamsahu" means wipe, bi ru'usikum. Ru'usi means your heads. Ru'usikum means your heads. So it says wipe, bi, your heads. So what does this bi actually mean in the Quran? It's chapter 5, verse 6, Surah Ma'idah. So what does it actually mean? It has a specific meaning. So it has 2 meanings according to Arabic language. It is sometimes used as a mere addition for emphasis, as in the words of the Exalted, Tambut bi Subhanallah, I keep messing up on this. No. Bidduhni, yes. This little thing throws me off. It's supposed to be Ain Hamza. So Tambut bidduhni. According to the one who read Tumbitu with a dhamma for ta and a kasra for ba from the root ambata. Okay, so if you don't understand the Arabic of this, don't panic. But if you do, there are 2 forms of verbs that we're talking about. There's form 1 verb and there's form 4 verb. So if you remember, you have tambutu would be a form 1 verb. Tumbitu would be from the pattern af'ala yuf'ilu form 4 verb, which makes it transitive. It's an increased form of the verb, right? So what happens here is, if you have one of the recitations of the Quran being read tumbitu, right, and you have a dhamma on the ta, it's increased form, it causes it to become transitive, which means it's going to take a direct object, a maf'ul bihi. So what happens is, why would you have a ba there if it's going to be taking a direct object? It means that ba must only be there for emphasis and no other actual meaning. So this is what his argument is, that this ba is basically superfluous and it doesn't actually need to be there for a specific reason. Okay? So let me preface this by saying, I remember when we were actually studying this issue, one sister in the class, she got really upset, and because she didn't like the word mir, right? So even though in our Arabic it wasn't mir, but she says, my teacher taught me that there are no letters in the Quran that don't serve a function. And if this is just an addition that has no meaning or no purpose, then I refuse to accept that there's a letter in the Quran that's only there for, that's an additional letter and that doesn't have any purpose. But so she actually misunderstood, in case anyone has that doubt or something like that, because she wasn't the only one who had that question. In case anyone does have that question, understand that when they're saying the ba is za'ida, meaning it's an additional ba that doesn't need to be there, it doesn't mean that it doesn't serve any purpose. It serves the purpose of emphasis or the purpose of highlighting something, very similar to if you put inna, or sometimes you add fa inna, sometimes you add la, for example, all of these other things. So don't fall into that trap, okay? So Ibn Rushd is saying sometimes it's used as a mere addition for emphasis, so the ba could be there. He's saying at other times, the particle ba, which is actually a ba with the kasra, bi ru'usikum. At other times, the particle ba indicates the idea of a portion, of something, a part of something, as in the sentence, أَخَذْتُ بِثَوْبِهِ وَبِعَضُدِهِ, which means I held him, or I grabbed him, by his garment and his forearm. So bi means by, in this case. So I grabbed him by his garment and his forearm. So imagine someone comes up to me and grabs me here, right? So they're saying, I grabbed you, B, your garment, and B, your forearm. Does it mean that you grabbed his entire garment? No. Did you grab his entire forearm? No. But you use the B. So it means you grab part of something. Right? When you grab somebody by the shirt, you didn't actually grab their entire shirt, like we talked about. So the same thing here. Sometimes the ba is used in a partitive sense where it indicates a part of something. Right? So this is two usages of the same letter. So he says, there is no purpose in denying this. That is, the fact that the ba may convey the idea of a portion of. Okay? Now this is important. Ibn Rushd primarily follows which school of thought? Maliki school of thought. Maliki school of thought holds that you have to wipe the whole head or part of the head? The whole head. So what he's doing here, if you read subtly in between the lines, Ibn Rushd is saying these Malikis are getting a little so hardcore that they're trying to deny that there's a partitive aspect of a ba. So he's throwing this in there and saying there's no purpose in denying this. This is known, well known in the language. Stop trying to pretend it like it doesn't exist. Right? So he's responding to his own Maliki friends and saying you guys are being a little bit unjust and hardcore, but you could just read that into it. That's why he's very subtly throwing that in there, right? And then he says, this is the opinion of the Kufi school of grammar. So there are schools of thought in grammar. We had talked about it in some class somewhere. So there's the main schools of grammar that are very popular are the Kufan school and the Basran school. And they differ in some ways. And he said this is the opinion of the Kufi school of grammar, that this is something that's very common. Those who considered it superfluous, the ba, meaning it's just there for emphasis, it's not needed for an additional meaning, it's just there, so it's superfluous, they had deemed obligatory the wiping of the entire head. So let's analyze that. Why? So if somebody believes that the ba, which says, the verse of the Quran says, wipe be your heads, right? So if the ba has no meaning, it would mean wipe your heads. And then the head would apply to the entire head. But if somebody believes that the ba means part, then it would mean wipe part of your heads. And then you have a totally different opinion. So he's saying that the people who believed that the ba was superfluous, they held that the entire head's going to be wiped because then the word heads is the direct object of the verb that you're supposed to wipe. So he says superfluous here means that it is added only for emphasis. So he probably, predicted that someone was going to complain about that too, so he got it. Those who considered the ba as indicating apportionment have deemed obligatory the wiping of only part of the head. And now it's obvious why, because the ba indicated a part of the head. Those who preferred this meaning have argued on the basis of the hadith of Al-Mughira, Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah, the companion, that the Prophet, God's peace and blessings be upon him, performed wudu, wiping his forehead and turban. So what they're saying is that there's a hadith that the Prophet actually performed wudu and he had his turban on and he actually wiped part of his head and then he wiped over the rest of his turban, which means that he didn't wipe his entire head. And if it was obligatory to wipe your entire head, he would have wiped the entire head, or he would have wiped the entire turban and skipped the head if it was an exception to the rule. But he wiped part of the head, and this is an evidence for the people who believe that you have to wipe the whole head or part of the head. It's evidence for which group of people? Part of the head, exactly. It's making sure you're following. All right. It is reported by Muslim. So this is in Sahih Muslim. So it's a very authentic hadith. If we accept that the ba is superfluous, there still remains another probability. Whether the obligation relates to the front part of names, like the head, or to the back part. Right? So again, he kind of hints and says, there's a lot more to talk about. But guess what? We're going to skip that and move on to the next issue. So this is Ibn Rushd's style. He's like, you know what? There's a lot more we can discuss. But you know what? We'll just stop right here and move on. All right. So this is wiping the head. Any questions? Yes. No, no, it's always wamsahu, which is the command, but bi ru'usikum. The ba is there in the Quran. The question is, what does the ba imply? Does it imply the meaning actually becomes wamsahu ru'usakum, or does the meaning actually become bi mean by bi ru'usikum? So that's the issue. According to the people who did it according to both, it can be done with one hand. You just gotta wipe. Either Malik says you have to wipe the whole head, though, right? You have to do all of it with one hand. If you did one hand, yeah, of course. So remember, this is not what's recommended. This is not what you're supposed to be doing. This is the bare minimum, right? It's like in class, in most schools, passing a class, you need to get 60%. In CIS, you need to get 70%. Nobody goes, I'm going to aim for that 60%, and I passed, This is like the D, so that you don't fail in your wudu. So you don't aim for that, right? That's not your goal. So your goal is to aim for what's the best, right? Inshallah, do the whole thing. All right, yeah.
Even for those that say that the bat is for apportionment, don't they also have the same conversation on which part of the head is allowed to be wiped?
That's, as far as I know, that's not such a big issue. So the question was, the people who say that it's part of the head, do they have a main discussion about which part of the head needs to be wiped or not needs to be wiped? I've not come across too much discussion on that. Perhaps it's in maybe one of the schools or something like that. But I don't think it's as prevalent as their discussion on which or how much of the head to wipe. Okay. Yes. So the neck and the ears, that's a whole separate issue. So the neck is not really the issue about whether it's part of the head. The ears, there's a whole debate on whether the ears are part of the head or not part of the head. And he actually has that in the book, but we're not going to cover that one. No. Only Imam Abu Hanifa, only the Hanafis say the neck. Nobody else says wiping the neck. No. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to repeat it. Jazakumullah. Keep reminding me. So the question is, there are things which are fard, which are mandatory, and there are things which are sunnah, which are recommended in wudu. So does it work that whatever's in the Quran is fard and whatever is in the hadith is sunnah? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. So this debate is about the fard, whether it's mandatory, how much do you need to wipe, whether the evidence is. So in this one, the discussion starts out by discussing the verse of the Quran, but it also includes hadith, and it also brings in Arabic grammar, right? So you cannot just say that it's because it's in the Quran they're talking about fard. They could also talk about fard that's directly in hadith and it's not in the Quran. So you can also have that too. This issue in itself, it starts primarily in the Quran, and the main issue is the verse in the Quran. Yeah, inshallah. Okay, so moving on to wiping over the turban, which is 1.1.2.8. Okay, determination of the objects of wiping. All right, so what you notice is, by the way, this book has not been categorized very well, whoever categorized it. So what they've done is sometimes they put like 3 issues under one subtitle. So unfortunately, I didn't want to sit there and redo the entire book, so we just kept it that way. So the jurists disagree about the sufficiency of masah or wiping over the turban alone. Meaning if you're wearing a turban, and we're only talking about a turban, not a cap, not a hijab, not anything else, it's just a turban. Are you allowed to wipe over it just by itself when you're making wudu and you don't have to wipe over your head. That's the issue at hand here. So he said, this was permitted by Ahmad ibn Hanbal. This was permitted by Abu Thawr. And we talked about who Abu Thawr is. This was permitted by Al-Qasim ibn Salam. So you see the comma there? That comma should not be there. So somebody made a mistake and they thought Al-Qasim and Ibn Salam are two different people. It's actually Abu Ubaid Al-Qasim ibn Salam. So it's one guy. So Al-Qasim ibn Salam and some other people. Right? So it was permitted by Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, founder of the Hanbali school of thought. And we talked about where that's practiced. Did we talk about the Hanbali school? Not so much, huh? Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal was the fourth school that's very prevalent. It's primarily practiced in Saudi Arabia today. And where else? No, not very, very prevalent in part of Egypt, but pretty much what's very familiar, the movement of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was very close to being Hanbali based. So you find that most of the influence there is comes from a Hanbali school. And also there are other places where it is practiced, but it's not as prevalent. There was some politics in the past regarding Saudi and the Ottoman Empire and all of that. So interestingly, when I was visiting Al-Azhar University, there is a place in Al-Azhar University where they had 4 different classrooms and they're marked. Said this is going to be the class of the Hanafi school where we're going to teach, and this is going to be the Maliki school, this is the Shafi'i school, this is the Hanbali school. During a period of time in history, they shut down the Hanbali school, the classroom, because of politics with Saudi Arabia. They said, we're not going to teach that madhab anymore. So they brought it back now, so it's being taught again, but it's interesting. It's an interesting thing. Yes, question. Good question. I don't know if I had mentioned this before. So why does he bring up Imam Ahmad now, even though we're familiar with 4? Did we talk about the 3 madhab, 4 madhab thing? We did, right? The scholars in Spain, they didn't really consider the Hanbali school to be like a real solid madhab. So that's kind of why. So he brings him up now more like being a hadith scholar like Abu Thawr. So he goes, some of these other independent scholars like Imam Ahmad was a hadith scholar, Abu Thawr was a hadith scholar, Ibn Hazm was a hadith scholar. That's why he brings them up in a separate category. Not so much as a madhab. So that's why he brings them up here. So he goes, this was permitted by Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Abu Thawr, Al-Qasim ibn Salam, and some other people. So some group of people, they allowed you to wipe only over your turban. If you're wearing a turban and you had it on, you don't have to wipe over your head. It was prohibited by another group. So he just says another group, he doesn't mention them. And by Malik, by Shafi'i, and by Abu Hanifa. So by all the other 3, prominent madhabs. Their disagreement arises from their dispute about the validity of acting upon the hadith related by Al-Mughira, again Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah, and others, that he, meaning the Prophet, peace be upon him, performed masah, he wiped on his forehead and on his turban. Okay, so number 1, there's a hadith about wiping over the forehead and wiping over the turban. So that's evidence number 1. Number 2, and also upon the analogy of the masah of boots. Wiping over boots. Boots means socks, leather socks. So there's 2 evidences. There's a hadith about wiping over the turban, that the Prophet wiped over his turban. Second evidence is, do you apply analogy on wiping over your leather socks or wiping over socks, that you can also do the exact same thing for wiping over your turban? So if we allow analogy, then you would be able to wipe over your turban as long as you meet the same requirements. So if you remember, the requirements for wiping over the socks were what? What were some of the requirements? You have to put them on in a state of purity, in a state of wudu. Number 2, it has to cover all the way up until the ankle, cover your whole foot up until the ankle. What else? There's a time limit and all of that stuff. So let's just take the first 2. So the same thing with your turban, and you can't, if you take it off, it resets, right? So with the turban, you would also have to perform wudu and then put it on and leave it on, and it would have to cover your entire head, right? So that you would be allowed to wipe, if you use analogy on the wiping over the socks, to also apply it back to wiping over the turban. Right? So this is what he's talking about. So two things here. So this is their disagreement arises from this. Okay? it is for this reason that most of them stipulated that it be worn in a clean condition. Right? So most of them who permitted it and allowed it, they say you have to wear it in a state of wudu because they made analogy based upon wiping over the socks. Yeah, you have to do the same thing. This hadith was rejected by some people. So this hadith that's talking about wiping over the turban, it was rejected by some people, either because it was deemed unauthentic by them. So on what basis did scholars reject certain hadiths? So it gets really interesting. So number one reason they rejected it is they said because the hadith itself is not authentic according to the criteria. And what's the criteria for hadith being authentic? 5 main criteria. Number 1. No, that's not number 1. Just the hadith itself. Looking at the hadith itself, what's number 1 criteria? We studied this. What about the Isnad? There's no missing links in the chain of narrators. Number 2. Precision. So every single narrator has to have precision of what they related. So they should have good memories. They should not be making mistakes. If they're known for making mistakes or being forgetful or something, they're going to be disqualified. Number 3. You had all done this in this class, by the way. Some of you did this in the class. Adl, yes. They have to be upright and honest and reliable people. Number 3. What's number 4? It has to be free from defects. So defects either in the chain or in the text. And there are certain defects we had talked about in hadith. So there's other defects that are there. And what's number 5? It should not be shadh. It should not be irregular, abnormal, where it contradicts other hadiths that are actually, there's no irregularities in that hadith. All right, so there's 5 conditions for a hadith to be authentic. You can see hadith 102 for more details. You don't need to know it right now, but just kind of a review. So one reason why scholars rejected it is because it didn't meet these 5 conditions for them, the hadith itself. Right? Or the second reason why they rejected it is because the apparent meaning in the Quran contradicted it in their opinion. That is, the command in it about the wiping of the head. So reason number 2 why they rejected it is they say the apparent meaning of the verse in the Quran which talks about wiping over the head contradicts this hadith, and therefore this hadith is rejected because it seems to contradict with the Quran in its apparent meaning. And one more condition, the hadith itself is ahad, meaning it's singularly narrated. So it's not reaching a high level of chain of narrators. Therefore, the Quran can actually override this. And the scholar said, we're going to reject the hadith based upon what is in the Quran. So this is reason number 2. Reason number 3 is that, where'd it go? Or because it was not widely accepted in practice. Now, what does that mean? It was not widely accepted in practice. So this is kind of what they're saying. The companions didn't do it. The early Muslim generations, they didn't do it because they all used to wear turbans. Turbans were very common at the time. So why weren't the companions actually wiping over their turbans, whereas they were wiping over their socks? So there's something going on here. So the scholars are looking and saying something's going on. The fact that the companions didn't do it, although it would have made their lives so much easier. And they did wipe over the socks, but they didn't wipe over the turban so much. So then he explains this and he says, this is according to those scholars who require widespread practice for matters reported through individual traditions, individual hadith. So there's a group of scholars that say if a hadith is narrated through individual narrations and it's not a bunch of people narrating the same thing, then you have to actually have widespread practice of something which should have been widespread. Because wudu, everyone makes wudu all the time. Turbans, everyone was wearing a turban, and yet they're not applying this. So then he says, particularly in Medina, as is known about the school of Malik. So he's talking about Imam Malik, who said that this practice should have been prevalent in the city of Medina, in particular, who stipulated widespread practice as a condition. So I don't even remember if we covered this in Islamic Law 103 or not, but Imam Malik had this principle. Did we cover Amal Ahl Medina? No? Okay, maybe. We talked a little bit about, okay. So Imam Malik's opinion is that when the Prophet, peace be upon him, passed away, where was Islam mainly established and where were all the companions living? In the city of Medina. So he's saying that what's happening is most of the companions, whenever they went somewhere, they always came back to Medina. Some of them retired in Medina and they stayed there and they were continuously teaching. So what happens is because Medina was the most stable city out of all the cities that Islam was in, it has the most stability in Islamic teachings. So what we do is if we look at the city of Medina and we look at what people are practicing, even during my time, Imam Malik is talking, even during my time, what's happening in Medina, not today anymore, okay, it's gone now, but during Imam Malik's time, if we look at Medina, what's happening, this is the generation of companions teaching the successors, and now Imam Malik is right there, the next generation. So he's saying there's no way that they could have changed something. So whatever's happening in Medina, if it's being practiced across the board and they consider this to be part of Islam, they consider it to be part of Islamic law, it has a weight as an evidence in Islamic law. So he says this is known as the practice of the people of Medina, according to Imam Malik. And he says if the practice of the people of Medina in the first century contradicts a singularly narrated hadith from one companion in one chain or something, then the practice of the people of Medina can override that one hadith because of his way of weighing evidence, his methodology of weighing evidences, okay? Because he sees that as kind of like a tawatur. So many people were doing the same practice uninterrupted, and there's no way it would have been some kind of modification in the city of Medina. So this is his understanding, all right? So he's saying, based on that, we can actually reject this hadith because it's singularly narrated and our other evidence establish it. So he mentioned 3 ways to reject the hadith. Either it doesn't meet the conditions of authenticity. Number 2, it contradicts something that's clearly stipulated in the Quran. And number 3, it contradicts the practice of either the people of Medina or the general practice of the companions, right? So these are some of the reasons. The hadith is reported by Muslim, as we said before. Now that becomes a big shock to a lot of people. You see, because you're not supposed to question Bukhari, you're not supposed to question Muslim, because they're the most highly authentic volumes. Yet, you find them questioning a hadith that's in Sahih Muslim, saying we're not going to act according to it. So even if they question either the chain or they question some part of the hadith, they may dismiss it in another way. Okay, so we'll be talking more about this. So this is reported in Muslim. Abu Umar ibn Abdul Barr. We talked about him, right? I believe. We talked about him. So he was a specialist hadith scholar who lived in Spain. He lived in Andalusia as well. He was one of the main sources where Ibn Rushd gets a lot of his information. He wrote 2 massive books, which are commentaries on hadith. They're like 20 volumes each. So most of Ibn Rushd's summary of opinions is actually based on Ibn Abdul Barr's 2 books, Al-Istidhkar and At-Tamheed, which are both commentaries on Muwatta of Imam Malik. So Abu Umar ibn Abdul Barr said that it is a defective ma'lul tradition. So it has illah. Remember we said 5 conditions? So condition number 4 was, it is free from defects, from illah. And he's saying this hadith has an illah. It has a problem in it, and therefore it's going to be rejected according to the criteria of the people of hadith, or the scholars of hadith. Why does it have an illah? Where's the defect in the hadith? He explains what it is. He says, in some of its versions of the narration, the wiping of the turban alone is mentioned. So it only says the Prophet wiped over his turban, while that of the forehead is not mentioned. So in some narrations, it mentions the turban only. In some narrations, it says the Prophet wiped over his forehead and his turban. Now, what's the difference? Is there a difference between the 2? Yeah. The difference for those people who believe that wiping part of the head is sufficient. Right? But it wouldn't be a difference for the people who didn't believe it, because it still falls in the category of exception then, right? So this is the difference. So this is why he said, you have the same hadith being narrated in different ways. It's for this reason that some jurists did not stipulate with the wiping of the turban, the wiping of the forehead as well. So there are some jurists, they said, you do not have to wipe the forehead when you're wiping the turban, as well as the original requirement and its substitute cannot be combined together. Now this is a principle in Islamic law that scholars came up with. لا يجمع بين الأصل والبدل, which means you do not combine the original thing you were supposed to do with the substitute thing you're supposed to do. So to give you an example, when you're wiping over your sock, right? If you're wearing socks and you're wiping over your socks, let's say you're wiping over the sock and then you decide, you know what? It's a hot day. I'm going to wipe over my socks, but you know what? Just for the heck of it, let me just open my sock and let me just throw some water in there to wipe it up, to wash it a little bit too. And what they're saying is you don't do that because wiping was a substitute for washing. So you're not supposed to engage in washing when you're supposed to be wiping. Right? So that's the whole point of, so you should not be combining both of them together because there's no need to do that. And it kind of defeats the purpose of doing it in the first place, right? Same thing with your head. So you do not combine between, actually that's a different case. That's a different case. Let me think of another example. Wiping over a bandage. So you're cut, you got a bandage here. Right. Or yeah, even something like that, but we'll stick with this one. So you got bandage, and you're supposed to wipe over it because you're injured. So let's say you're wiping over it, but then you say, you know what? Okay, I'm going to leave the bandage on, but I don't feel comfortable just wiping over it, you know? So I don't want to take it off, but I'm just going to soak it with water so some water gets in there. So it's kind of washed and it's also wiped at the same time. You're combining what you weren't supposed to do because the whole point of your bandage being on there and you wiping was so that you don't have to wash the area. So either you wash the area or you wipe the area, you don't do both. Right? So that's what the principle is. You don't combine both. So they're saying the same thing, that they're making this argument, you don't do both. You do one or you do the other. So this is the argument behind wiping the turban. Okay. They do, yeah. So that's also, yeah, some people do that. So that's wiping over the turban. This is not a major issue because I don't see anyone wearing a turban in here. Right? So as much as I like the turban, kind of, Zain, you're close, but as much as I like the turban, actually, it has a certain connotation in our society today. I think it's stylish and awesome, but because of the connotation, I generally try not to wear it anymore, unfortunately. Although I would love for that culture to change, because I just think it looks awesome. Khair, alhamdulillah. Yeah. Hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. So if you want my opinion on this, yeah. 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 So the question is, there are some scholars today who are saying that because of this debate on the turban, whether you can wipe over it, there are a lot of sisters who started wiping over their hijab as well, and then just doing a little lock of hair or something like that. Right. 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 So if you go by the Shafi'i school, wiping a part of the head would have been sufficient. Right? Personally, I'm not convinced by the argument because I believe it's overly literalistic. Right? So that I'm not very inclined towards that opinion. Although if someone's following that, that's fine. But I'm just not primarily inclined towards that. So what I encourage them to do is at least get one hand in there, and yeah. If you were just put your hand from the back inside and just wipe over the back. Or the front. So those who wear the tight, they say that, I think the headband, we had this debate long time ago. So they said the headband becomes loose if you undo it from here, and then you have to retie it from the back and all that. And, started becoming an expert in these issues, somehow. But so that's the thing. So they say it becomes loose. So that's what she's saying. You could do it from the back, or you could do it from the front, or you could do it from whatever tends to work. Yeah. So that's yes. Okay. My opinion on wiping over the turban? My opinion, okay, my recommendation is just take the turban off, because you generally don't wear the turban anyways. Most people are not going to wear it. The, so here's my opinion on the hijab, okay, is that the turban, and we're going to see this when it comes to socks a little bit. So the turban is an exception to the rule. And you shouldn't make analogies based on exceptions to the rule. So you shouldn't make an analogy on the turban to the hijab. The same way you shouldn't do it with the socks. And as soon as we come to the socks, which is coming up right now, we should be careful about the analogies that we make unless they're in the same category. Because a turban and hijab are two completely different things. And they came for different reasons, right? And the establishment of wiping over the turban has much less corroboration in hadith than wiping over the socks does. So I think because it's a requirement of wudu, we should be a little bit more cautious on that. So that's my opinion on that. Yeah, inshallah. All right.
How do you count 1/3? Just from here, or you can also count 1/3 like this?
1/3 or 1/4?
Whatever.
It's approximate. It can be any part of the head. 1/3 or 1/4 could be any part of the head. It's just kind of estimate what 1/3 would be. So. But you don't wear turban, so you're fine. You don't wear turban or hijab, so you should be fine, inshallah. Alhamdulillah. Inshallah. All right. Any other questions on this? Wiping over turban? Okay. No, so good question. Is it head or hair? It's actually head. It's not your hair. So if your hair is coming all the way down the back of your neck, you cannot, even if you wipe like completely that part of the hair, you're not wiping your head. Because it actually says head, and it's not your hair, it's your head. No. It say forehead, so it means forelock. It means forelock, which is the front part of the head. Yeah, the forelock. Yeah, it is. That's the unfortunate problem of translation, and sometimes when people may not be specialized in the text they're translating, that's what happens, unfortunately. Yeah. No, it's sufficient as long as you're. So let me clarify that. So when we say wipe over the head, I see what you're saying. So if you say wipe over the head, let's say you have very thick hair that's like coming up, right? So do you have to like get all the, let's say you have a fro. Do you have to get all the way like down to the head itself? So when we say head means you are wiping the hair on your head, and you're wiping the dimensions of the head where the hair is, but not necessarily pressing all the way down to the head. Okay? Inshallah. If the hair is hanging loose, that's not part of the head anymore, right? So yeah. All right. Now we get to types of socks. So what types of socks can you wipe over? 1, 1, 2, 13, 3. All right. There we go. So sub-issue number 3. The kinds of objects. About the kinds of objects that are to be wiped, the jurists uphold wiping, or must agreed upon wiping over boots. Now boots here means the word khuf. So khuf actually is what we call a leather sock or a leather boot. It's like a leather bootie that you put on. Usually nowadays you zip it up. It used to be tied and stuff like that. So it's actually something that they used to wear. It's kind of like a mix between a shoe and a sock. It was almost like shoes at that time. So it's like if you put on leather socks, you could literally walk around, run around. It's very nicely padded and everything. So it's pretty strong material. So the scholars agreed that wiping over these khuf is agreed. But they disagreed about socks, what's called jawrabain. So there's two words. One of them is khuf or khuffain, which means two khufs. and jawrab, which means jawrabain, which means two socks. Right? So there's two different things. So now they're debating and discussing, okay, we're very clear on wiping over khuf, but are you allowed to wipe over jawrab? Right? So jawrab is a non-leather sock. It's made of something else. Right? So one group of jurists permitted this, and they said, yes, you're allowed to wipe over the jawrab, while another group prohibited it, and they said, you're not allowed to wipe over that jawrab, but you're allowed to wipe over the khuf. Among those who prohibited this are Malik, Ash-Shafi'i, and Abu Hanifa. All right? Those who permitted it include Abu Yusuf and Muhammad, the disciples of Abu Hanifa, and Sufyan al-Thawri. Okay? So he's saying Imam Abu Hanifa's two most renowned students differed with him and allowed that you can wipe over it. And Sufyan al-Thawri was another scholar, I think we talked about him already. He also allowed it. Whereas Malik, Ash-Shafi'i did not allow it. And they say Abu Hanifa did not allow it. Actually, what happened was, near the end of his life, Imam Abu Hanifa changed his opinion, and he told his two students, now I agree with you two. So he reversed his position, and he went back, and he says, you guys were right, and I'm with you on this one. Okay? So here's the thing. So Ibn Rushd is a specialist in Maliki fiqh. So these subtleties are a little bit more difficult to find, and they're not present in all the books. So the books that he's going through, he's not going to find it as easily as you would find it if you were a specialist in this field. Right? All right. So yeah, yeah. So actually, Imam Ahmad permitted it as well. In case you want to know, the Hanbali school also allows it. Okay. So. So I'm going to get to this interesting anomaly or irony that why is it that most of the Hanafis staunchly oppose wiping over the socks today. I'll get to it, inshallah. Inshallah. All right. So the reason for their disagreement arises from their dispute over the authenticity of a hadith from the Prophet, peace be upon him, on this issue. So the issue is, why do they differ? One is whether or not the hadith about wiping over a jawrab is authentic or not, which conveys that he, meaning the Prophet, wiped his socks as well as his sandals, his na'lain. So he wiped over his socks and he wiped over his sandals, his jawrab, not his khuf. They also disputed, so the question is whether that hadith is authentic or not. They also disputed as to whether analogy for other things can be constructed upon wiping over khuf, or whether it's a fixed ritual or non-rational interpretation upon which no analogy can be based, nor can it be extended to other things. So this builds upon the exact same issue we covered last week. Remember about the intention of wudu, is it rational or non-rational? Are you able to rationalize it or you don't rationalize it? It's the same thing, and what you're going to find is the same people who were rationalizing are going to rationalize it again, and the same people who weren't will generally not rationalize it. So it's kind of methodology being developed here. So two cases, right? One is the hadith and one is analogy on wiping over khuf. Those for whom the hadith did not prove authentic, so some people said the hadith is not authentic, or information about it did not reach them. So he throws in a little thing in there and saying, you know what, maybe they didn't know about the hadith. So he's kind of like just throwing that in there as an insinuation there. And they did not employ analogy upon khuf. So one, they didn't take the hadith and they didn't employ analogy upon khuf. They restricted wiping to khuf only. So that's one opinion. This is their evidence. While those who considered the hadith to be authentic, or or they upheld analogy upon khuf, they permitted wiping over socks. So either one of these would be sufficient for you to wipe over your socks. So he says, this hadith has not been recorded by the two sheikhs, that is Al-Bukhari and Muslim. So the two sheikhs are known as the famous Al-Bukhari and Muslim in hadith because they are the most authentic, but has been deemed authentic by At-Tirmidhi. So At-Tirmidhi is another hadith scholar, and he declared it to be authentic, right? So what are some of the hadith books? Just review real quick to clear your mind. What are some of the hadith books that we have? We have Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi. Which one? Nasa'i, Muwatta, Ibn Majah, Musannaf of Abdul Razak, Abu Dawud, you got Abu Dawud. Musannaf of, another one. Imam Ahmad, the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, good. We said Muwatta. That's pretty good, alhamdulillah. That's sufficient for now. All right. Question, Yusuf. Is it true that if it's not in their book? No, not necessarily. We covered that in class. Were you in the class? If it's, okay, did Al-Bukhari or Muslim believe that if it's not in their book, it's not authentic?
No, I'm saying that is it true that because it's not in the book, that doesn't mean that they didn't think it was authentic?
Which book you're talking about?
He's saying if it's not in Bukhari or Muslim, then it can, then does it?
I get it, I get it. Is it true that if a hadith is not in Bukhari and Muslim, then it's not authentic?
No, I'm saying they thought, it doesn't mean that they thought it wasn't authentic.
You mean Bukhari himself and okay. So we don't know for sure. There's different narrations about Bukhari's methodology, right? But not necessarily. So he didn't say. Actually, no, he did. He clearly said that I did not include everything that's authentic in my book. That's why he named it Mukhtasar, a summarized version. So yeah, not necessarily. Yes.
Is there any report of the general practice of the Sahaba regarding this issue?
Regarding this issue, there is. I think it might come, and if not, I'll tell you. Okay. Okay. Where's my cursor? There we go. Okay. Oh, okay. We're skipping. Okay. There we go. This hadith has not been recorded by okay, but it's been recorded by At-Tirmidhi. Because of the vacillation of leather socks between boots and between non-leather socks, there are two narrations from Malik about wiping them. One prohibits it while the other permits it. So there's actually two narrations from Imam Malik that are conflicting narrations. Now, why would one scholar have two conflicting narrations? Either one, because his students didn't fully understand his opinion in its different nuances. Number two, because he was answering different people's questions in different ways, and they ascertained from his answers something. Or number three, he had changed his opinion over the course of time, like Imam Abu Hanifa did. So this could be another possibility, right? So that's the thing. The problem is when you can't figure out which one came later, you're stuck with two opinions. And this is one of the problems with Imam Ahmad. He's got narrations, 5 or 6 narrations on one issue. So it says he says this, it says he said this, it says he says this, and there's a reason for that, but it's more detailed. All right. Okay, so that's it, and we're done. Huh? So my opinion is actually, I wrote an article on this, and my opinion is mentioned in the article. So if you want to know my opinion, I recommend you read the article. So just go to my website. It's actually not that long. Yeah, you just go here. Go to mustafaomar.com. Click on articles. Go down to a lesson in fiqh, wiping over socks. And then you read that. And at the end, you're going to find my opinion. Huh? Yeah, just read the conclusion and you'll figure out my opinion is that I'm actually not going to tell you my opinion. So, but you will understand the issue much better. The what? Yeah. So actually, I wrote my research paper, my first year thesis on this issue, but it's in Arabic. So that's the problem. So this is an abridged version of my paper that I had written on it. Okay. So you can Google translate it if you want. It's not going to help you though. And non-leather socks. All right, so that's it. So now going back to your question, why do most of the Hanafis today, why are they so staunch against it? Because if you allow analogy, right? And the Hanafis allowed analogy. If you allow analogy on leather socks, you have to specify the limits of that analogy, right? So what are the limits? The limits that they came up with was that since leather socks have a characteristic of being thick and you can walk around in them, whatever you're wearing has to also be thick and you can walk around in them, okay? So that's what happened is, and they're, like modern dress socks are considered very thin, almost like nylon, or for example, there's an issue about pantyhose that comes up. And I get asked this a lot, that can you wipe over your pantyhose? If you're wearing pantyhose, can you wipe over them just like you're wiping over socks, right? So I'll answer that later. Staying on the topic now, there has to be a level of thickness that you apply in order for wiping over socks to be prevalent. So those Hanafi scholars, they made the level of thickness very, very stringent. So they have to be really, really thick. And then there's other political motivations and all that stuff about why it happened. So that's pretty much in a nutshell what happened. And then there's another issue. I'm not going to get into it, but I think there was a misunderstanding by some scholars because there's an opinion in the Shafi'i school which says the socks have to be waterproof. They have to be water resistant. So what happened is they took that condition as well about water resistance and they took it 100% at its face value. And they say if you have waterproof socks, then you can wipe over them even if they're thin. But if they're not waterproof, even if they're thick, you're not allowed to wipe over them. So there's something called seal skins, if you've heard of seal skins. So seal skin socks are surfer socks. And they're pretty thin, but they're made of, but what is the material called? Kevlar, basically. It's like a Kevlar type where they make bulletproof vests and all that. So it has that type of material that's used for it. It's extremely thin, but it's completely waterproof. You could literally stand in water and no water will go through your foot. So they're like, you can wear these socks and they have proved that. All right, whereas other ones they didn't approve. So there's a whole issue of waterproof and long discussion on that. Okay.
That's talked in this, right? The point 4?
Are we covering point 4? Is it in the syllabus? No, we're covering only point 3. So we're not covering point 4. So you can read that on your own. Okay. Moving on. Any other questions about this? Okay, Yusuf. Okay. The time of wiping. Was this the next one? Yes, the time limit. So the reason why we're covering this one is not because I care so much for the time limit. I reminded myself why I chose this. There's a good discussion on hadith, and we're trying to learn principles, right? So, sub-issue number 5, the time of wiping. The jurists also disagreed about the extent of its time. Imam Malik held that it is not limited by time, and one who's wearing the khuf may wipe over them as long as he does not take them off or is not affected by a major impurity, janaba, where he needs to make ghusl or a whole bath. Abu Hanifa and Shafi'i held that it is limited by time, meaning you have a time limit upon which you're allowed to wipe over your socks. The reason for their disagreement is based upon the conflict of hadiths concerning this issue. There are 3 relevant hadiths which have been related. The first hadith is the hadith of Ali from the Prophet, peace be upon him, that he said, the Prophet, peace be upon him, determined 3 days and accompanying nights for a traveler, and 1 day and 1 night for the resident. All right, so you remember we covered this, and this is the opinion that we had taken. It is recorded by Muslim, so it's in Sahih Muslim. This is hadith number 1. Hadith number 2. The second is the hadith of Ubay ibn Umara, that he said, O Messenger of Allah, do I wipe over my khuf? He said, yes. So he asked for a day, he said yes. So he asked again, for 2 days? He said yes. He asked again, I lost myself. Okay, a 3rd day? He said yes, till you reach the 7th day. And then he added, meaning the Prophet added, wipe for as long as you want. Wipe for as long as you wish. This is recorded by Abu Dawood and At-Tahawi. Okay, So Abu Dawud, we know, At-Tahawi was a scholar of the Hanafi school. He wrote 2 books which have many original hadith narrations in them. One of them is called Mushkilul Athar, and the other one is called Sharh Ma'aniul Athar. What's interesting about the first title, Mushkil al-Athar, okay, Athar means reports, and it's primarily talking about hadith. So the title of the book is the Mushkil of the Athar of the hadith reports. What does Mushkil mean for those of you who either know Arabic, Persian, or Urdu? Difficulty, problematic. So this is a book written in the 3rd century, or a little bit after the 3rd century, where the author titles it Difficult Hadith, problematic hadith that we have to deal with. So this is not a modern phenomenon that people are saying there's some difficult hadith, we don't understand what they mean, how do we reconcile, how do we understand them? This is not some modern phenomenon that we don't understand what's going on, we started questioning and asking questions. Muslim scholars have been doing this since day one. So you got even titles that say Mushkilul Athar. There are titles which actually say Mushkilul Quran, right? So things we need to understand about the Quran which don't seem, on the face value, we don't understand them immediately without looking into them and researching them and asking questions. So anyways, so this hadith is related by Abu Dawud and Tahawi. The 3rd hadith is the hadith of Safwan ibn Assal, who said, we were on a journey and we were ordered not to take off our khuf for 3 days and accompanying nights, except in the case of major impurity, but not for urinating, sleep, or when answering the call of nature. So what is major impurity? When you need to make ghusl. For example, intercourse, ejaculation, wet dreams, something like that. What is not major impurity? Urinating, sleeping, answering the call of nature, going to the bathroom. These things don't necessitate a ghusl. So, now we got Ibn Rushd. Very seldom does he actually talk himself. So here he wants to throw an eye in there. I'm gonna throw my opinion in. I would say that the hadith of Ali is authentic because it's recorded by Muslim. So if the Muslim is strong, we should take it. About the hadith of Ubay ibn Amara, he said, Abu Amr ibn Abdul Bar, his favorite guy again, has said that it is not established, it's not authentic, and it does not have a verified chain of narration. Therefore, it cannot be used to oppose the hadith of Ali. So because it's not even nearly as strong as the hadith of Ali, we cannot use this because it seems to contradict the hadith of Ali. Though the tradition of Safwan ibn Assal has not been recorded by Bukhari or Muslim, yet it has been considered sound or authentic by experts in hadith like At-Tirmidhi and like Abu Muhammad ibn Hazm. So At-Tirmidhi was an expert. Abu Muhammad ibn Hazm, did we talk about him?
Yes.
We did, right? We said Dawud al-Zahiri and Ibn Hazm? Okay, good. So he was a specialist in hadith as well. Like Ali's hadith, it conflicts in its apparent meaning with Ubay's hadith. It is possible to reconcile the two by saying, so now we're going to say there's a possibility of reconciling both. And we talked about apparent contradictions and real contradictions. So now he says, let's see how we can reconcile these. You can reconcile the two by saying that the hadiths of Ali and Safwan place a time limit in response to the question, in response to the questioner, while the hadith of Ubay ibn Umara is explicit about the negation of such a limit. But the hadith of Ubay has not been authenticated. It is therefore necessary to act according to the tradition, the hadith of Ali and Safwan, and that is better, although their implication conflicts with analogy. I.e., a time limit is not effective in annulling purity, as factors that nullify it are impurities themselves. Okay, so this is loaded, right? So I'm getting to it. So let's dissect. So see this hadith right here, this sentence right here. This is one sentence right here. Okay, so he just packed everything in there. So I tell you what, we'll take a break for salah. We'll come back and we'll dissect this sentence. Is it two? Where's the second one? Oh yeah, that's right. Okay, so this one is the other sentence here. It's still long, yeah. Okay, so we'll take a break, pray Isha, get your coffee, come back, and we'll understand what this hadith sentence means. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Nice. Absolutely. You're in Long Beach, right? Alhamdulillah. Zain did it, no problem. Alhamdulillah. Text message. Yeah, alhamdulillah. So let me check for online students if they have any questions. Forgot to check actually. Of course.
Question for that one part where it says there's a contradiction within the text of the evidence of the Quran.
Mhm.
What section is that? He doesn't mention in the book. Would you know what section it is?
Yeah, yeah. Ask me in class. I'll answer it for you. Okay. So after we're done with this issue, I'll answer it, inshallah. Okay. So let's figure this sentence out. These two sentences. So it's possible to reconcile the two. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's possible to reconcile the two by saying that the hadith of Ali and Safwan place a time limit in response to the question, while the hadith of Ubay ibn Umara is explicit about the negation of such a limit, but the hadith of Ubay has not been authenticated. So what he's saying is that you're trying to reconcile these things. You can't reconcile them. So the best way to reconcile them is discard the hadith of Ubay ibn Umara, because it's clearly saying that there is no limit. And the other two hadith are saying that there is a limit very clearly. So he's saying that since the first two are authenticated and the other one is not very authenticated, discard the hadith of Ubay ibn Umara. It is therefore necessary to act according to the hadiths of Ali and Safwan, and that is better. So this is Ibn Rushd's opinion. It's better to act according to those hadith, although their implications conflict with analogy. So what is the implication of these hadith? That there's a time limit for wiping over your socks that will expire. And when the time limit expires, you're not allowed to wipe over your socks anymore. So he's saying this goes against analogy. Analogy of what? He says a time limit is not effective in annulling purity, as factors that nullify it are impurities. So he's saying what happens is, when the time limit is gone, you're not able to get in a state of purification anymore. Getting out of a state of purification, nullifying your state of being in purification with wudu or something. If you look at wudu and you look at ghusl, what breaks them? What causes them to go into that state of impurity where you need to make wudu or ghusl again? It's usually something that's related to an impurity. Either you're urinating or you're defecating or there's blood or vomit or something like that. So he's saying there's none of those things have to do with any type of time limit whatsoever. So if you keep your wudu for as long as you keep it for, as long as you don't lose it, there's no time limit on wudu, there's no time limit on your ghusl. So if we were to apply analogy on those things, this conflicts with an analogy on the general idea of being in a state of purification. But he's saying that we still take it anyways because of the hadith, and also because the analogies to purification is not, he doesn't mention this, but I'm telling you what he would say. The analogies to purification are not direct. So you're not making a direct analogy on wudu, you're just looking at it kind of in a general sense that purification, going out of purification, is not the issue here. So it's not that you're losing your wudu, you're losing your ability to wipe over the socks. So there are two different things. If the time limit expires and you lose your wudu automatically, that would be some type of different issue, right? But that's not the issue at hand. The issue is whether you can wipe over your socks or not. All right, so that's the key, and that's the issue here. All right, so time limit is not effective. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, so Kenny had a question about something previously on the contradiction between the verse and the hadith, right? Okay. So he's saying, what is the verse and what is the hadith? So let's go back. Where was that? That was on the turban, right? On the turban, okay. All right, so let me just answer it before going back. So the verse talks about wiping over your head. And that's all it mentions. In wudu, you have to wipe over your heads. Right? So وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُسِكُمْ, wipe over your heads. So the verse says to wipe over the head, and the hadith says, when the hadith that says the Prophet wiped over his turban, it skips wiping over the head. That's why it is a contradiction between the two. So that's what it's talking about. Okay? Alright. What's next? Unclean excretions invalidating wudu. 1.1.4.1. Let's see. Here we go. Alright. The jurists of the regions disagreed about the invalidation of wudu resulting from unclean excretions from the body into 3 different opinions. So we're talking about what breaks your wudu, what invalidates your wudu. They said the unclean excretions that come from your body have 3 different opinions. So like urine and blood and vomit and all that, there's 3 opinions. One group said they took into account excretions alone. Whatever the outlet or the state in which it's excreted. So he's really condensed this into like exactly the definition of what they said. So what they're saying is this group, right? They're saying that an excretion, let's say you're urinating, urine is coming out of your body, okay? Feces are coming out of your body, blood is coming out of your body, whatever it is. They're saying it doesn't matter what the outlet is. So somehow, if urine were to exit from above your part, somehow you had an injury there and urine is excreting from another part of your body, directly from your intestine or something like that, or feces are coming out of your intestine, they're saying, this group said, it doesn't matter what the outlet is, right? And it doesn't matter the state in which it's excreted. It doesn't matter if you're sick or you're not sick, you have a problem, you have no problem. It doesn't matter. The fact that it came out of your body breaks your wudu. This was the opinion of Abu Hanifa, his disciples, Sufyan al-Thawri, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and a group among whom are companions. So there's also some of the companions held the same opinion. They said that each unclean substance flowing from the body or excreted from it necessitates wudu. So what is an unclean substance? We had talked about this previously. Unclean substances in Islam are blood. Is like what would you not have on your clothing that you have to wash off before you can pray? Blood, vomit, pus, urine, excrement. I think that's about it. Pre-seminal fluid, semen, things like that, right? So what they're saying is that each unclean substance that flows out of your body or is excreted from any part of your body necessitates wudu, like blood, for example, excessive nose bleeding, drawing of blood. Someone's drawing blood, so this becomes an issue. Does it break your wudu or not, right? When you're donating blood or something. Cupping is where hijama, where you put you drain the blood from your back or different parts of the body. Where did I go? I lost cupping. Here we go. Cupping and vomiting, except for sputum in Abu Hanifa's view. Right? So what is sputum? Phlegm, like the phlegm, coughing up phlegm. So Abu Yusuf is one of the prominent students of Imam Abu Hanifa. He says that. Abu Yusuf, one of the disciples of Abu Hanifa, said that wudu is necessary if it's a mouthful. So he's talking about, he's talking about vomiting or he's talking about sputum? Maybe he's talking about sputum. Actually, no, the vomit is the madhab itself. But maybe he's talking about something else. So that's not of major relevance here. None of them considered minor bleeding as significant except for Mujahid. Right? So that's not 100% true actually. Abu Hanifa and his disciples also considered minor bleeding to be significant. Right? So sometimes Ibn Rushd doesn't have exactly what most of the scholars said, but a few mistakes here and there. None of them, here we go. Some other jurists took into account the passages through which the excretion occurs as factors affecting the nullification of wudu and limited these to the anus and the penis, or the front part, saying that anything excreted from these two passages invalidates wudu, whatever its nature, whether blood or a stone or mucus, and whatever condition of the body, whether you're in health or whether you're in sickness. So now we're getting into the other stuff. So they're saying that if blood comes out of any of your private parts, or a stone comes out, so let's say you have what is it called when you have stones? Kidney stone, that's what it's called, kidney stone. So when you have gallbladder, kidney stones, or even mucus or something like that, when it's coming out from the private parts, right? They're saying that that's going to break your wudu. Doesn't matter what the condition of your body is, whether you're healthy or whether you're sick. So they said the people who held this opinion include Imam Shafi'i, his disciples, and Muhammad ibn Abdul Hakam from among the disciples of Malik. So one of the Malik students held the same opinion. So that's opinion number 2. Opinion number 3, others took into account the passages and the type of excretions and also the manner of excretion. They said that normal excretions from these passages, like urine, feces, madhi. So what is madhi? Madhi is pre-seminal fluid. Wadi is this sticky fluid that comes out when people are ill, when there's a type of sickness and there's illness there. And wind, meaning gas, passing of gas, flatulence, if passed in a state of health, invalidate your wudu. So they're saying all these things invalidate your wudu if you're in a state of normal health, right? They did not take into account blood, bile, worms, nor the incontinence of urine. That none of these things break your wudu at all. So if you have urinary incontinence, urine is dripping, something like that, because you're in a state of illness, therefore it's not going to break your wudu because you're in a special exempted state. Those who upheld this opinion were Malik and most of his disciples. So we got 3 opinions so far. Okay, let's look at them. The reason for disagreement is that the unanimous conclusions of Muslim jurists over the invalidation of wudu due to whatever is excreted from the 2 passages, like feces, urine, wind, and pre-seminal fluid, on the basis of the apparent meaning of the book and also of the hadith, led to 3 possible interpretations. So what is he saying right now? He's saying all scholars agree on a few things. All scholars agree that anything that comes out of your private parts, if it's feces, urine, wind, meaning gas, and pre-seminal fluid, everyone agrees that these will break your wudu because of the verses of the Quran on the subject, and also because all the hadiths on the subject. And he says we're not going to get into all of those details right now. We're going to look at the differences of opinions. That's what they agreed upon. So he said, but it led to 3 different interpretations based upon all of this. So the first interpretation is the hukum means ruling. So first, the ruling should be related only to the substance of these things, which are agreed upon, as in Malik's opinion. May Allah have mercy on him. She threw an extra, prayer for Malik. He's Maliki. So what happened? But he's not a hardcore, he's not that hardcore of what do you call it? He's not like what's the word? He's not prejudiced against the other schools. So Imam Malik's opinion is the ruling is only on the substance of these things. So because we have texts that say urine, feces, pre-seminal fluid, whatever else he mentioned, if it's coming out of the private parts, that's what the texts state. And we should limit our discussion to the substances which were being talked about by the Islamic text, the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet. So we focus on the substance itself. So whatever things are said to break wudu, we focus on those things only that are mentioned. So this is opinion number one. The second likelihood is that the ruling be associated with these things insofar as they are pollutants, meaning filth, excreted from the body, because wudu is purification. And purification is adversely affected by filth. So it's going to be affected by filth. So what they're saying is, now we're going to expand it to just looking at it from the filth perspective. The third possibility is that the hukum, the ruling, be related to them insofar as they are excrements from these two passages. So three different ways of looking at things. The first way so he's basically restating what he already said. So this is like a repetition of what he said, and you probably needed this repetition anyways. So, number one, we look at the substances that are mentioned. Blood, urine, feces, all that stuff. We look at those things and we focus on that. Opinion number two is, we don't limit it to just this. These things are of the genus or the category of impurities. So, because these things break your wudu, we look at all the other things that we know are physical impurities that should not be on our body, and we apply these and expand them to include all the other impurities as well, and not limit it to any place. So therefore, blood is going to count. So blood was not mentioned in these categories, right? But urine is mentioned. You ask the question, why is urine mentioned but blood was not mentioned in terms of breaking your wudu, but blood was mentioned that you have to wash it off before you actually go and pray? So he's saying that the reason why these break your wudu is because they're impurities. Therefore, the blood should also break your wudu and be expanded into the same category. So we need to expand what the Prophet said and understand why he said it, rationalize it, and figure out that these are impurities coming out of your body, so the other impurities that he also forbade being on your clothes will also break your wudu, because that's the purpose behind it. So this is opinion number two. Opinion number three says, no, we restrict it, only things which comes out of your private parts, nothing else from any other part of the body. So without even knowing or even remembering who said what, can you imagine who is most likely to rationalize it and say we're gonna look at the underlying wisdom behind it and we're gonna expand it? And who is more likely to say we're gonna restrict it to exactly what the text said? Out of the three that we know of. Literalists will be there as well. Out of the three that he keeps talking about, Abu Hanifa, Shafi'i, and Malik, which one is more likely to say we're gonna restrict it down to just the two private parts and the things that were specifically mentioned, and we're going to restrict it to just that? Which one of these three is most likely to say that? Shafi'i. Just like the wiping over the head, just like the other issues, and we're going to keep seeing this pattern again and again. Which one is most likely to say we need to rationalize this and understand the underlying wisdom and then apply it somewhere else? Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Abu Hanifa. Just like with the intention. He tried to rationalize the intention when it came to wudu, tried to do the same thing when it came to other things, so he's doing the same thing. Except when it came to socks, he became rigid in the beginning of his life, right? Not at the end of his life, when it came to applying analogy. So sometimes he'll actually go the other way. So it's not always that they happen. Sometimes you become more rigid in something, and Allah, everyone knows best why they do. So it's not everyone is 100% consistent from our perspective of what they're doing. They know what they're doing, they have something in their mind, right? So this is something interesting. So just kind of see the different methodologies developing here. So we got three. So that's the third possibility. According to the last of the two views, the requirement of wudu, according to the last two views, the requirement of wudu, because of these forms of uncleanliness that are agreed upon, belongs to the category of a particular injunction intended to be general. Right? So, according to the last two views. I guess. Okay, so what they're saying is the particular injunction was intended to be general. Remember we talked about khas and am, particular and general, something which are, so that's why we had the introduction to the class last week. So you have something particular, but it was intended to be more general. So that's the same thing. These are specific impurities, but they're intended to actually be, more general in nature, right? Let's see. Malik and his disciples held that it is a particular category that is applied to its particular category. So it's particular, and it's going to be applied to be particular. So impurities were mentioned, and they're going to remain as impurities, and they're not going to expand to other impurities that were not mentioned. So for example, blood is not going to be in there, right? Where are we? Oh, here we go. Ash-Shafi'i and Abu Hanifa agreed that the command belongs to the particular category intended to be general. So actually Shafi'i, in a way, and we're going to see how, it was intended to be general. So actually Malik took a more literal position, and we're going to see why he's saying this. So the command belongs to the particular category intended to be general, meaning these urine, feces, all of that stuff was specified by the Prophet, okay? Now, and the Quran. So these things are particular, but they were meant to be something more than that. So how did Imam Shafi'i said something more? Anything which comes out of your private parts is going to break your wudu, even if it's a stone, according to Imam Shafi'i. So if a stone comes out of your body, it came out of your private parts, therefore it's going to break your wudu, because it came out from that area. So he actually expanded the text by saying something a stone is not mentioned in the text. So even a stone could break your wudu if it's coming out of your private parts, right? Imam Abu Hanifa did the same thing, but expanded it beyond just the private parts to your entire body. So if blood is coming out of your body, it's an impurity, therefore it can still break your wudu anyways. So this is what they agreed. They said that the particular category was intended to be general in the first place. Yet, they differed, meaning Abu Hanifa and Shafi'i, as to what is the generality intended here. So cancel what I said before about Imam Shafi'i on this issue. He's actually generalizing a little bit more, actually, right? So he's saying, what is the difference? They said, some of them said more general, some of them said less general. So Malik preferred his opinion, requiring that the principle is to maintain the particular within its sphere until an evidence indicates otherwise. So Imam Malik is saying, if this is what the Prophet said, this is what he meant, unless we have some other evidence which can prove that we should expand it more. This is what Imam Malik is saying. Ash-Shafi'i is arguing that what is intended is the passage and not what is excreted. So Imam Shafi'i said, you guys looked at it wrong. You weren't supposed to look at the things that are coming out. You were supposed to look at where it's coming out from. So you viewed the issue wrong in the first place. So that's what you should have been focusing on, right? Because of their agreement over the obligation of wudu due to the passing of wind from the passage below, and that wudu is not an obligation when it is exhaled from above. So what does that mean? So his more evidence is, if you pass gas from below, that's from your private part. When you pass gas from above, meaning from your mouth, you're burping. It's also coming from the digestive tract, so is gas coming from the digestive tract. He's saying the fact that one of them breaks your wudu and the other one doesn't break your wudu has an effect. So you have to consider that and take it into consideration, right? Although both of them are from the same category. They're both, gas or wind or, whatever you want to call it. So the only difference between them is the outlet, meaning where they're coming out from, right? So this is Imam Shafi'i's argument. This indicates, it appears, that the ruling depends on the outlet. Okay, so right here, this is Shafi'i's opinion. Ibn Rushd comes along and says, but this is weak. So I don't agree with Imam Shafi'i at all. As the two kinds of winds are different with respect to their characteristics and their odor. So burping and passing gas are two different things, one in the characteristics of what's coming out, and even in the smell of what's coming out. So you have to take that into consideration and not apply the same thing and say they're just both air coming out. It's not just air, there's a difference. So Imam Abu Hanifa would say the same thing. What he says the difference is that when you burp, what is actually coming out? It's coming out kind of from your digestive tract, but it's not the food that's been digested, which is why the smell is not so bad when you burp. But when you pass gas, the reason why it smells bad is because it's from the food that's been gone through the digestive process, right? So it has something to do with digestion. And there's a whole discussion about how that plays a role. So as you can see, it's getting deep. So that's what you're supposed to understand is how the discussion gets deep, and how those conversations that you have in your social circles about these opinions, when they don't really understand the details and the nuances, they're not very deep. So that's really what the take home of this is be careful about having those amateur discussions. So Abu Hanifa argued that the factor of annulment is the unclean excrement coming out through any outlet because of the adverse effect of uncleanliness on ritual purity, meaning you're being in a state of purification. And though this kind of purification is legal, meaning it's symbolic in a sense, it's in Islamic law, it resembles the actual physical purification. So he's saying, yes, they're different, but it resembles washing off impurities and making wudu. They both resemble some type of actual, there's some resemblance between the two. And that is being free from filth. So this ties back into what Imam Abu Hanifa said about the intention of wudu. So if you see all of them coming together. So further, he argued on the basis of the hadith of Thawban, which says, the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, vomited and then he performed wudu. So Imam Abu Hanifa said, look, this is a hadith where the Prophet vomited and he performed wudu after he had vomited. And also he argued on the basis of what is related from Umar and Ibn Umar about the obligation of wudu due to a nosebleed. So this is, he took some hadiths about nose bleeding and he said, look, there's hadiths about this too. Moreover, Abu Hanifa argued on the basis of what is related about the command of the Prophet for the continuously menstruating woman to perform wudu at the time of each prayer. So the woman who's this is kind of a bad translation. So I'm pretty sure continuously menstruating woman basically means the woman who has istihada, which is continuously bleeding woman. But it's, what's it called? It's called, what's the English name? Logorrhea or something like that. Anyway, it's the illness where a woman keeps on bleeding but she's not menstruating from that area, from her private part. That's what we're talking about here. So there's a hadith about that too, and that's a very authentic hadith. So the meaning of all these, according to Abu Hanifa, all these hadiths that he brought, is that any unclean excretion from any passage annuls the wudu. So what he's saying is, you look at all these hadiths together, and you try and figure out why do they all have some factor involved. The common denominator, after you look at all of these hadith, is that it has to do with the fact that there's an impurity that's being excreted from your body somewhere. And that's the common denominator between all of them. Ash-Shafi'i and Abu Hanifa agreed that factors nullifying wudu are effective even if they occur during sickness. So they both agreed that, you know what? If urine comes out due to some illness or something, it's still going to break your wudu. They both agreed on that. Because of the command of the Prophet, peace be upon him, requiring wudu for each prayer in the case of the continuously menstruating woman, which is an illness. So it's a type of illness and she still needs to perform wudu, and it's still considered something that she needs to do. As for Malik, he was of the view that illness is effective in obtaining a concession on the analogy of the continuously menstruating woman. So he took the same hadith and he said, no, that shows you that there's an exemption based on this type of example, who was simply ordered to wash herself. So Imam Malik is saying she just ordered to wash herself, she's not really making wudu. So there's a difference between the two. The reason is that this hadith of Fatima bint Hubaysh is agreed upon for its authenticity. So everyone agrees that this is an authentic hadith about this woman who was actually undergoing this problem. And there is a dispute only about the addition. That is, the order to perform wudu before each prayer. So what you have now is this hadith. And this hadith about this woman having this problem is authentic, it's agreed upon, it's established. But some of the narrations, remember there's different narrations of the same hadith. Some of the narrations mention that she was told to perform wudu and other narrations do not mention that she was told perform wudu. They just said she had a problem. The Prophet said wash yourself. The other hadith says she has a problem. Prophet said wash yourself and perform wudu. So some of the narrations have the addition, some of them don't have the addition. Now this comes back to the hadith sciences where we talked about if there's an addition in the text by a trustworthy narrator, do we accept the addition, or do we say that no, because the other one was also authentic, this person must have made a mistake and added their own interpretation and accidentally construed it as being a statement of the Prophet. So this is what's known as ziyadatul thiqah. Right? So an addition by someone who is trustworthy and reliable, but did they make a mistake? So which one do we go with? So we had kind of discussed this, and it comes under the category of illah, of whether this is considered a defect that you accept, or it's not a defect, or it is a defect and you don't accept it. That's a whole nother discussion. It's a very long discussion. And if you want more information about this, I recommend you read an article by Dr. Jonathan Brown. It's called, what's it called? It's about ziyadatul thiqah. It's about additional information in hadith. I forgot what it's called, but if you want to read it, you can ask me. I'll tell you about it. Yeah. So the length of the extra bleeding, about how long it can last and everything. No, actually, because it ties in with the length of menstruation. So it actually relates back to the length of menstruation, and whatever crosses that length becomes irregular bleeding. Yeah, that's it differs. Yeah, it differs. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So that's another good question. Actually, Dr. Jonathan Brown actually addressed Jonathan. So the question is, if there's a discrepancy in the hadith, the addition is a discrepancy, and it shouldn't be accepted. Doesn't that discredit the narrator? Okay, it should technically discredit the narrator, but the problem is you don't know which narrator exactly added it. Nor do you know, let's say you do know which one added it, right? You don't know what their intention or their motivation was. So this is considered a minor slip. So what actually happens is, since it was not intentional, this is considered a small slip of their memory. And if you have a small slip of your memory, you do not degrade your status as a hadith transmitter unless you've made major mistakes. So this is considered a small mistake. If you made a major mistake, then you get D-ranked. So because these are small mistakes, you don't get D-ranked, although just zooming out and looking at it and saying, but you're attributing something to the Prophet that was not from the Prophet, that is a major thing. But if it's a slip or you made a mistake along the way, then it's an accidental thing. So that's why it doesn't actually degrade the narrator per se. So remember, there's the criteria. So the criteria is they're honest and they're honest and upright, and the second one is they're precise, and they have a good memory. So this small thing is not enough to cancel out the fact that they're precise and they have a good memory, because this is considered a minor slip. But if they made a major slip and they mixed around two narrators, or they would constantly mix around narrators, or forget this or forget that or something like that, then they would be degraded. There is a rule. A lot of minor slips will lead up to a major slip, and then you get degraded, you get taken down. Okay. So we're not done yet. So let me finish. So where are we, Yusuf?
Isn't it possible that the narrator who added something was making a commentary, and then the next guy attributed it to him?
Yeah. So there's two possibilities, right? So there's a possibility that the narrator who did the addition added it as a commentary, and then the next guy afterwards, so this is a good point, the next guy afterwards mistakenly thought that the commentary and the hadith are combined together. So it could have been another guy down, not the actual guy who was giving the commentary. So that's one issue, and you don't know who in the chain is going to do that. So that's the issue. The second thing is, it could be that the first guy who didn't have the addition forgot the second part of the hadith, whereas the other guy remembered the rest of the hadith. Right? So that's why you can't just toss one out or you can't toss the other. It's so difficult to make a decision on what exactly happened. So that's why it becomes very, detailed. You have to really zoom in detail and look at this, So that's what it is. Fatima bint Hubaysh, there's only dispute about the addition. So dispute about the addition, and that is the order to perform wudu before each prayer. It has, however, been declared sahih by Abu Amr ibn Abdul Barr, so his favorite guy. This guy said it's authentic on the analogy of the one who bleeds incessantly, as in the case of Umar, who continued to perform his prayer while blood was flowing out of his wound. So remember, Umar ibn al-Khattab, if you took Islamic history too, or if you know about it, he was stabbed in which prayer? Fajr prayer, right? So he was stabbed and he kept on praying. So you think if bleeding was going to break his wudu, but he kept on praying, then there's a reason why he kept on praying. So he just kind of throws that out there and he stops and he says, now we'll move on to the next subject. This is typical Ibn Rushd. Right. Yeah, there's a lot of hadith about the companions, but then this is the opinion of Umar. So it's not a hadith again. So it's it's a companion's opinion, right? In front of the Prophet? I'm not sure about that one. Yusuf.
Can you kind of sum up this whole section?
Okay. So it's a tough section. Okay, so sum up this. Well, that's what you're going to do in your outline. But summing up this whole section, okay? What breaks your wudu? 3 opinions. All the stuff that's mentioned directly in the Quran and Hadith only. That's one opinion. Anything that comes out of your private parts, regardless of whether it's mentioned in the narration, weird things like stones and worms and all that stuff, or blood coming out of your private parts will break your wudu as well. Opinion number 3, anything, in addition to all these things, anything that's classified as an impurity, exiting from any part of your body is going to break your wudu. And the reason why they differed, opinion number one is that you restrict what was mentioned in the text because it was intended to be only those things which are mentioned. Opinion number 2 is that those things which were mentioned actually they all come out from the private parts, so the intention was the private parts, anything that comes out. Opinion number 3, these things are of the same genus, or the reason why they were mentioned is because they're impurities. Therefore, any impurity established by other texts of the hadith will also break your wudu regardless of whether they come out from. Yeah. For Shafi'i, for Shafi'i and Imam Malik, bleeding from the mouth, you could be bleeding from your thing. You could literally be just blood gushing out all over your body. It doesn't break your wudu. So it doesn't break your wudu. You just wash it off and you can pray. Yeah. You can, but if you wash it out. Yeah. Okay, so that's a whole nother issue. so what do you wash out impurities with? Does it have to be soap and water or just water or all that? That's a whole nother debate. If you want to know so I can't go into the debate. You just want to know the opinion, like you want to know my opinion that we teach in class, is that you just use water, and as long as you wash it with water and you wring it out, you don't need to use soap, you don't need to heat the water, you don't need to go to that extent. Whatever stain remains, it remains as long as you tried your best to get it out. Just the part, that's afflicted. No. So the thing, if you know where the impurity is, you wash it off. Simple as that. And if you don't know where it is, you kind of guess which region it could potentially be in and wash the whole region where it's most likely to be. So But see, so this is a misquote that I hear too much in the Muslim community. If it dries, then it's pure, right? So, if you have urine all over your shirt, okay, and then it dries, does it mean that it's pure? You're talking about the ground. So the ground is different. Be careful about that statement, right? So the ground. So we covered this again. So if the ground is dry and it's completely dried out through natural, means and everything, and the odor is pretty much gone and all of that, you can consider it to be pure. That's the principle. Okay. All right. Moving on. We got a lot of issues to cover. Unclean excretion, touching women. 1.1.4.3. We're still in wudu. So touching women. So anyone from the Shafi school is very interested in this subject, and you're going to find out why. So my mother-in-law, for example, she's very stringent follower of Imam Shafi. She has to follow everything according to Imam Shafi. My father-in-law, who is actually the scholar in the family, he's more lenient in taking different opinions. So sometimes he chases her around the house just to play with her and going up to touch her so that her wudu breaks. Because in the Shafi school, we're going to see, just touching someone will break their wudu. So he goes around running around sometimes just to touch her after she made wudu. She's like, oh, you broke my wudu. So that's the love between them. Huh? We're going to see. Inshallah, we're going to see. All right, so touching women. All right, the jurists disagreed about the obligation of wudu for a person who touches a woman with his hand or with other sensuous limbs. One group held that one who touches a woman, reaching out for her when there's no barrier or covering between the touching skins, is obliged to perform wudu. So that's one. Similarly, one who kisses her as a kiss, according to them, is a kind of touching, whether or not he derives pleasure from it. So you see the mind of a legal scholar, everything is, look at this. The one who kisses her as a kiss. What is a kiss besides a kiss? So now they go, no, well, there could be a kiss that's actually not a kiss, technically. So we have to define that too, right? So if he kisses her as a real kiss, according to that group, it's a type of touching, whether or not you get pleasure from it. So there's two opinions. Whether you get pleasure from it or whether you don't get pleasure from it, it's going to make a difference. You're going to see why. This opinion was upheld by Ash-Shafi'i and his disciples, except that one time he made a distinction between the person who's touching and the person who's being touched. And he made wudu obligatory for the person who's touching to the exclusion of the person who's being touched. So if my mother-in-law got that opinion, it would have made her life much easier. But she didn't come across that one yet. So because her father was a scholar, but she herself didn't get to study, unfortunately. So she just married her father's best student. And that's what happened. So anyway, alhamdulillah. Between the person touching and the person being touched, making wudu obligatory for the person. Another time, he, meaning Imam al-Shafi'i, held that it was obligatory on both. So this is considered the more popular view. Right? A third time, let me just take this one. A third time, he made a distinction between women in the prohibited degree, meaning mahram, you're not allowed to marry them, and between a wife. So there's two different things. Now, why would he make a differentiation between the two of them? You can kind of get a hint. Remember when he was talking about kissing and whether you derive pleasure from it? So your touching of a wife is going to be more about pleasure, whereas your touching of a relative is not about that type of intimate pleasure. So it's different categories. So in this case, the prohibited degree between and a wife, making wudu obligatory in the case of touching the wife, but not in the case of women in the prohibited degree, while another time he held them to be similar. So he's got different statements. Yeah. So we're looking at Imam al-Shafi'i. So we're not trying to reach a conclusion here. We're trying to look at what Imam al-Shafi'i said. All right. So others made wudu obligatory only when lustful pleasure is felt or it was intended. Either you feel it or you intend it. Again, two different opinions. What if you didn't intend it but you felt it? Do you have to intend it or do you only have to feel it? So you can see you can keep going into details here. Upholders of this view go into details, making a distinction in the case of the existence of a covering or otherwise. So let's say you touch someone with pleasure and desire, but there happens to be a glove on your hand. Does it make a difference or it doesn't make a difference? Right? And in the case of particular limbs whose touching is harmful. Right? What does it mean harmful? Meaning it's pleasurable. In the case of kissing, they did not stipulate pleasure. So they said pleasure is not a requirement of this, of kissing. Why? Most probably because kissing generally indicates pleasure. That's the reason why it's done. So this is the opinion of Malik and the majority of his disciples. So this is Malik's opinion. Some negated the obligation of wudu for the person touching women. So they said, you don't need to make wudu for touching women in any of these cases, which is the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa. Each of these schools has predecessors from among the companions. So meaning there are companions who hold all of these different views, except the situation of pleasure, meaning that pleasure would require you to make wudu and the non-pleasure wouldn't. For I do not remember that any companion stipulated this. Now I want you to understand, this is Ibn Rushd, this is Averroes, this is the guy who has meteors named after him, right? Look at the language, right? He didn't come and say, and if anyone makes an argument that a companion said that, they are completely wrong. And that's how a lot of amateur people talk who don't have very much knowledge. This guy has way more knowledge than you, and look at the humility in his statement. I do not remember that any companion stipulated this. I didn't come across it, I don't recall it, and he's writing these notes. So it shows you the humility in the amount of knowledge that this guy actually has. It's a good lesson for all of us. The reason for disagreement on this issue is the equivocality. Remember ishtirak? The equivocality of the term touching. So the word touching in the usage of the Arabs can have different meanings. So this issue is very similar to which other issue that we covered? The ba in what's the issue? Wiping over the head. Okay, so very, very similar. Has to do with language and what the word actually means. The Arabs apply it sometimes for touching, that is, touching by your hand, and sometimes they use it as an allusion to intercourse. So a group of jurists therefore held that touching causes causing wudu according to the words of the exalted, or you have touched women. So there's a verse, if you look it up, it's about wudu and it's about touching physically. They said it means intercourse, which leads to major ablution, which is bathing. Right? So this is one example of where it says, "Oh la mastamun nisa," it means have you touched women, that you have to take a bath in that case. Others maintain that the meaning here is that of touching by hand, and among them are those who considered it to be a general term intended for the particular. So again, we keep getting general, particular. So if it's a general term intended for the particular, what does it mean? So what is general term intended for general term intended for particular? Right? Touching. So the hand is particular, touching is general. But the touching itself is a term which can mean, if you limit it to just what it's touching, you know what, we're gonna continue this discussion next week because it's 10 o'clock. So I'll let people go. Any questions before we break here on this? Yes. Outline will not cover touching women, inshallah. And the outline for wiping the head was also done by me to give you a sample of how it's a little bit different from the first one. Make sure you do good outlines. Make sure you actually try to understand the issue. And that's probably why you would want to take notes in class. For those of you who are not taking notes and are wondering how you're going to do your outline, inshallah. Anything else? All right, inshallah. Don't panic. Don't drop the class immediately. It's not going to get easier. It will get easier because you're going to get used to it. You're going to get used to understanding this style, inshallah. Okay? Inshallah. All right. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nastaghfirukallah wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.